Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. Good evening. Thank you for everybody for sitting through the lengthy fundraising. Very important to the organization. Before I begin our discussion tonight, I want to give you some good news. The day before the election, on Tuesday, there were 11 members of Congress who routinely used anti-Muslim stereotypes in their conversations on Capitol Hill. In January, 4 of them will not be returning to Congress. Alan West from Florida claims Islam is not a religion, and he asserts that Muslims are a fifth column. He's not going back to Congress. I want you to be assured that Muslims played a strong role in making sure that electoral defeat happened. Similarly, Illinois' Joe Walsh, who cast suspicion on all Muslims, and Minnesota's Chip Kravac, who called one of the nation's leading American Muslim organizations a terrorist organization, will not be going back to Congress. Finally, there's Sue Myrick of North Carolina, one of my personal favorites. She retired. A few years ago, she held a press conference where she alleged that Muslim interns on Capitol Hill were spies. You may also recall her 2003 warning that a previously unknown security threat because, in her words, you know, look at who runs all the convenience stores across the country. Every little town you go into, you know? Is that one of the security threats we're facing, guys? We were talking about that earlier. Not to my knowledge. Convenience stores. Good one. I have another piece of good news for you. Islam's favorability rating last time it was polled in 2010 stood at 30%. So how's that good news? As of August 2012, Congress's favorability rating is 10%. You're still more popular than Congress, guys. So we're here tonight because we're among those, the American Muslim community in particular, and that's what I'm talking to right now, are on the front lines of those who are defending the Constitution. We're defending it from people who, selling anti-Muslim stereotypes and fear, seek to return America to a legal system that treats one group of Americans as different from all of the others. Worse, if you pay attention to the Islamophobes like Pamela Geller and David Yerushalmi, there are those who appear to be seeking to give rebirth to South African apartheid, except with religion as its new target. That's kind of a strong statement, and give me a moment, I'll prove it to you. First, let's look at efforts to legislate government-sanctioned discrimination against Muslims. You heard a little bit about it in the video. 2011-2012, 78 bills or amendments aimed at interfering with Islamic religious practices were introduced in 31 states and the United States Congress. 62 of these bills contained language that was extracted from Islamophobe David Yerushalmi's American Laws for American Courts legislation. Now, if you do an internet search of David Yerushalmi, on the first page of your results, you'll see his claims or his call for a war against Islam and all the Muslim faithful. You will also see his anti-woman, anti-black, and other biased comments on your first page. So I would just assert to you that there's reason to be concerned that a man who is so central to hate in this country can influence legislators at the state level. 73 of the bills I'm talking about were introduced solely by Republicans, and I'm not just talking fringe legislators. I'm talking far too often people who were involved in party leadership. These bills were signed into law in Arizona, Kansas, South Dakota, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. I want you to be very clear. They always talk about Sharia. They're defending the country from Sharia. This is a cover term. It's a cover for anti-Muslim sentiment. I have no doubt about it. In Tennessee, the original bill's definition of Sharia was actually, in practical terms, the entire faith of Islam. It said that Sharia encompasses all content taken from any of the authoritative schools of Islam, and it names Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali, Jafariya, and, just for kicks, adds Salafi. Any imam in the room, how many schools of thought are there in Islam? 4 in Sunni Islam, right? So essentially what they just said is Sharia is everything. So they were attempting to make being a Muslim illegal in the state of Tennessee. South Dakota anti-Islam bill sponsor Phil Jensen told an audience, this is a direct quote, "It is alarming how many of our sisters and daughters who attend American universities are now marrying Muslim men." So we got an anti-Islam bill. In Pennsylvania, the bill itself made no mention of Islam. However, in a memo to all House members, urging them to co-sponsor the bill, Representative Rosemary Swanger falsely claimed that Sharia is inherently hostile to our constitutional liberties. Later, pulling back from that position, Swanger claimed she had no idea how the memo was going to be written and claimed that it was never circulated. She also said that it was leaked by someone who was not my friend. But that strains credibility because I found the memo with her signature on the website of the Pennsylvania legislature. So it got circulated and it had your signature on it later. So I think I've already made the point. You might have already taken this conclusion. A lot of these guys don't know what they're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about that and see what it is that these guys are saying about us. The Star Assistant in Alabama reported no one, not even Senator Gerald Allen, who sponsored the bill, could point to examples of Muslims trying to have Islamic law recognized in Alabama courts. That's the pattern. Allen couldn't even define Sharia what Sharia is, when he was asked. What he told the reporter to do is to go ahead and talk to his legislative staff. So the reporter did. And the reporter asked his legislative staff a pretty simple question. Why does your definition of Sharia look like the one I just found on Wikipedia? You know what they said? That's because it is from Wikipedia. So, I know there's a university in this town. College students, you tell me, can you use Wikipedia in your papers? No? Yes? Maybe? No? However, it seems to be good enough for some legislators. In Texas, Leo Berman said his bill was necessary because he had heard, but not apparently bothered to confirm, that one American town was allowing judges to use Sharia. This is what he said. I heard it on a radio station here on my way to the Capitol one day. I don't know Dearborn, Michigan, but I heard it, Sharia law is accepted there, on the radio. Isn't that true? I mean, don't you bother to check before you introduce a bill, guys? The Kansas City Star reported that the Missouri representatives Paul Kurtman and Don Wells also agreed there was no evidence that state courts were using Sharia law. So the reporter went back to Kurtman a month later and said, well, have you got any examples? And Kurtman, a month later, was still unable to provide any examples. In Missouri, same thing. Speaker of the House, Stephen Tilley, could not provide a single example of foreign law trumping domestic law in Missouri courts. His office did later issue a statement outlining one case in New Jersey. That case was a really poor ruling. Anybody who's familiar with it knows it got no support from Muslim organizations because essentially the gentleman in the case went into court and tried to argue that it was his right under our faith to rape his wife. I don't think there's any Muslim in this room that would accept that as true. And so the ruling was rightfully overturned by a higher court. That's the way our courts are supposed to work, right? Sometimes judges make bad calls, other judges overrule them. So the news here is fairly straightforward. Yes, they've passed anti-Islam laws in 6 states. Yes, they'll try again in 2013. But if we here, in this room, commit to upholding the Constitution, we can preserve civil liberties. And CAIR has been at the forefront of doing that work on these pieces of legislation. The Constitution is the law of the land. We like it that way. We agree with people of the Jewish and Catholic faiths who already have established tradition using religious mediation, sometimes to form legal deals that within the law We are free to make choices in accordance with our faith. In accordance with Islam, my marriage contract required me to pay a mahr to my wife. What that is, essentially, is a prenup where the lady in the agreement gets money in advance of the wedding. She is allowed to do whatever she wants to do with that. So I don't know why anybody would have any complaints about that. In accordance with Islam, my home financing involves no interest. Guys, by the way, one of those groups is outside. Talk to them. Interest-free loans are pretty cool. Similarly, my financial investment strategy avoids me putting money into gambling, pornography, and weapons manufacturing. So I have no idea why anyone would treat that as a threat to American democracy. Let's talk about CAIR's lawsuit in Oklahoma. We filed a lawsuit when Oklahoma in 2010 passed one of these anti-Islam bills. We filed a lawsuit 2 days later in which we argued that the law violates the First Amendment, which says that Congress can't establish any laws that favor one religion or vilify another religion. That applies to the states as well as the federal government. We also argued the Supremacy Clause. It says that the Constitution, highest law of the land, nothing can supplant it. To date, 4 federal judges have ruled in our favor because we have attorneys like set out for it. The interesting thing, though, is that even though we have 4 federal judges ruling in our favor and the law is on hold, people say, you guys are trying to overthrow the Constitution. You're trying to subvert it. So I'm still trying to work this out. Maybe you guys can help me with it. They pass a bill that on its face violates the First Amendment, which means that undermines the Constitution, right? We file a lawsuit arguing First Amendment and Supremacy Clause, but we're the ones who are somehow subverting the Constitution. I argue to you again, Muslims are on the front lines of defending the Constitution. In Minnesota, the legislator who was going to introduce an anti-Islam bill pulled it 2 hours after a CAIR-led press conference. In New Jersey, after Muslim leaders joined with CAIR and other interfaith groups to oppose the bill, the legislator met with those groups and pulled it. Same thing in states around the country. Pennsylvania, Florida. I got to think about Florida because that was a long and difficult struggle, but we were eventually able to get the bill stopped. All around the country, CAIR has been joining with our Jewish partners, with our Christian partners to get these bills defeated. So that's one example of us being at the front line of upholding the Constitution. Here's another one. Let's talk about the election, right? Nobody in the room is sick about the election yet, right? Everybody still having fun with it? Good. So Herman Cain, you guys remember him? He was a front runner for a while for GOP's presidential nomination. Speaking to Christianity Today in March 11th, 2011, Cain said followers of the Muslim religion have an objective to convert all infidels or kill them. Cain also said that any Muslim who wants to serve in his administration would have to take a loyalty oath. He explained to Fox News host Glenn Beck that he would not require similar oaths from Mormons or Catholics because there is a greater, dangerous part of the Muslim faith than there is in these other religions. So I know we have at least one attorney in the room. Hopefully you get 2. Article 6 of the United States Constitution says there will be no religious test for public office. No loyalty oaths, folks. Your faith actually doesn't matter. Your merit to do your job is what matters. So we have a front runner on stage saying that he will make people take loyalty oaths and indeed undermining the Constitution while he's doing so. Was he thrown off the stage for that? He got applause. People clapped. Rick Santorum, also a front runner, endorsed religious profiling during one of the GOP presidential debates, saying obviously Muslims would be someone you would look at. In January 2012, journalists brought attention to a lengthy Islamophobic rant Santorum gave in 2007 And listen to what he said. In order to defeat what he barely defined who the Muslim enemy was, but in order to defeat them, Americans must educate, engage, evangelize, and eradicate. Newt Gingrich, now help me with this quote, because I still haven't figured this one out. I heard somebody laugh, so I think you already know this quote. Well, he feared that his grandchildren, by the time they reach his age, will be in a secular, atheist country, potentially one dominated by radical Islamists, and with no understanding of what it once meant to be American. So it's a secular country dominated by religious people. That's an example of politicians just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what'll stick. The good news here, even the Republican Party's nominating process, which, if you've been watching the news, they've been talking about it a lot lately, it drives candidates far to the right. Even that nominating process didn't select those three guys. Alhamdulillah. That's good, but each one of them is a front runner. I'll focus on one more group. These are public interest groups, how they too are interested in making sure that Muslims do not get equal treatment. Brian Fisher of the Islamophobic American Family Association, he believes the First Amendment does not apply to Muslims. This is what he writes. Islam has no fundamental First Amendment claims for the simple reason that it was not written to protect the religion of Islam. Got me on that one, dude. Similar to Fisher, a lawyer who was opposing a mosque expansion in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. And if you guys haven't heard about the mosque in Murfreesboro, you should read their story. These people are so inspiring. Their mosque has been shot at, burned, vandalized. They've been sued. They've been gone after personally. And they persevered and they just opened it recently. During the lawsuit, the lawyer who was trying to stop the expansion of the mosque argued that Islam is not a religion and therefore not protected by the First Amendment. Now, the federal government actually intervened in this one. They filed a brief arguing, yes, Islam is a religion. And we appreciate that very much. Let me not get anybody confused. But isn't it surreal that the government actually had to do that? We had to have an argument. One of the world's greatest religions. Am I doing a Rudy Giuliani here? No, that's somebody else. Good. One of the world's great religions, according to lawyers are attempting to say, it's not a religion. The Oak Initiative, another group whose name pops up all the time in association with anti-Islam religion or legislation, through its mouthpiece, a guy named Lieutenant General William Jerry Boykin. They say, this is what Boykin says, Islam should not be protected under the First Amendment, and there should be no mosques in America. The last group I'll pick on, the Family Leader, is an Iowa-based conservative Christian group. They asked GOP presidential candidates to sign a marriage vow. I don't know why it was called a marriage vow. I have to read the whole thing again at some point. That proclaimed their opposition to Sharia Islam. Now, it's in its original form, this pledge also contained troubling language regarding African Americans. It made the national news for a while. You might have heard about it. This is what it originally said. Slavery had a disastrous impact on African American families. Yet sadly, a child born into slavery in 1860 was more likely to be raised by his mother and father in a two-parent household than was an African American baby born after the election of the USA's first African American president. So these guys are trying to make an argument that somehow African Americans, hey, at least both of your parents were there while you were slaves. Which is not true, by the way. They broke up families constantly. And yet, that was removed, but one would think that would make the organization somewhat radioactive. Reasonable? Michelle Bachmann, Rick Santorum, Rick Perry, all signed the vow. What else can we look at? has challenged as Muslims being on the front lines of upholding the Constitution. So we've talked about anti-Islam legislation, we've talked about them trying to roll back Article 6 of the Constitution. So let's pick on Peter King for a little bit. I'm sure you guys heard about him out here, right? Yes? Yes. Good fun. He held a series of 5 anti-Muslim hearings, by the way. Everybody started ignoring him after the first one. The first one was considered one of the greatest religious news events of 2011. But for 7 years prior to that first hearing, he had maintained 2 kind of key allegations against the Muslim community. First, he says 80-85% of the leadership of the Muslim community is fundamentalist. Second, he says that Muslims are loyal, but they don't come forward. They won't turn in their own. Essentially, we don't cooperate with law enforcement. So throughout the hearings, CAIR was there. We were one of those at the forefront of exposing his anti-Muslim sentiment. And if you watched the first hearing, man, did he spend a lot of time on us. They attacked CAIR again and again and again and again. And I ran out of energy watching it after a while. But you know what? That means we were doing our job. We must have hit it there. Because let's face it, folks, you don't attack people who are irrelevant, right? You attack the people who are hurting you. So afterward, CAIR produced the only comprehensive study of the first 4 hearings. I got sick of listening to it, so I decided, you know what, okay, great. You've had 18 witnesses now, Congressman King. Come and testify before your hearings. How did you do on those 2 theses that you put forward? Did you prove them? So I read the testimony twice, which was really boring, by the way. I watched the videos again, which is a little more exciting because there's some life. And what I found, his first allegation, 80-85% of the American Muslim leadership is fundamentalist, nobody tried to back that up. Not one single person tried to bring any kind of facts to back it up. He had one witness who said a couple of words a little bit, but no facts, no figures, nothing. So here you go. You have 5 hearings. You control what's said in the room. You can't prove your first thesis. The second one, talking about Muslims don't cooperate with law enforcement. He had 6 representatives of law enforcement testify before his hearings. 5 of them did not back him up. Instead, what they described is strong bonds with the American Muslim community, strong relationships with Somali Muslims, and outreach and engagement going on with Muslim communities. So, you had 5 hearings, sir. You managed to prove that you're definitely a blowhard, but you definitely did not prove that American Muslims are anything other than loyal, contributing members of this society. So this is all nothing new. Throughout the history of the United States, unfortunately, there's always been at least one minority that's being targeted. I mean, think about it. Even at the founding, when the Constitution was inked, it counted blacks as 3/5 of a human being and left them enslaved. Women did not get the right to vote in presidential elections until 1920. And even after slavery was ended, African Americans were subjected to treatment, horrible treatment, discriminatory laws. If anybody's ever studied Jim Crow, you know about those kind of things. But they didn't hide. Reverend Martin Luther King was wiretapped. Not many people really know that. In an FBI memo, he was referred to as the most dangerous and effective Negro leader in America. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI at the time, referred to Martin Luther King as a degenerate. Today, they get Martin Luther King's birthday off as a federal holiday. I look at Japanese Americans as the best example for our community. They too were blamed for an attack on this country. They were put in internment camps, and I think we have to thank them that the same didn't happen to us. It's probably because of them that that didn't happen. They were vocal, They organized, and after 40 years of hard work, the government acknowledged what was done to them was wrong. So I'm hoping we can maybe do it a little faster, but we have a target in front of us. In fact, we inherit a rich tradition of standing up for an America that is based on a level playing field. That's what the Constitution establishes. Catholics were discriminated against. Jews were discriminated against. Mormons have been discriminated against. Each in turn has pushed back. It's simply our turn at this point. I guarantee you that at some point in time, the lens of bias and discrimination will turn to somebody else. If you're listening to the news right now, they're talking immigration reform is going to be on the table next year. You know what that means. You saw it in 2006. The Hispanic community is going to get railed against. We have to uphold the Constitution now because we owe it to the people who came before us and did their job. We don't want the people who come after us to go, the Muslims failed us. I have one final thought for you tonight. Have you signed me yet? No? All right. We are on time. When I got married, thinking about Muslims being on time, my wife is from Afghanistan. My family's all American. You're not going to clap for me in a second, because it's kind of devious. So we sent the wedding invitations to my family, asking them to show up at 7 o'clock. We sent the wedding invitations to her family, asking them to show up at 5:30. You guys know the outcome. They all showed up at 7 o'clock. So a final thought. Before he became a prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, was known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy. He didn't lie. He kept his word. We as Muslims have to think about this. Most Americans were introduced to our faith on 9/11 watching airplanes slam into buildings. The images of Islam they got after that, repeated in the media again and again, was crazy guy in a cave threatening horrible death to them. We in this room know that such monstrosities are heretical. They have no place in Islam. They're not compatible with any understanding of Islam. We know Islam compels us to be trustworthy. But I wonder how many of our neighbors retain that image of planes and crazy. And when I say that, I don't mean here. I mean here in the emotional places where logic and reason don't mean anything. These are just these emotional things that we're based on, where fear resides. They may harbor even unwanted a concern that maybe the bigots who claim Muslims are an existential threat to America are right. We must, each as an individual, and hopefully in partnership with CAIR, strive to become known in America as the trustworthy. We do that by upholding the Constitution for everyone. We do that by being a benefit to them and preventing harm from coming to them. I know you're committed to this idea. I pray you will join us in putting faith into action. Thank you very much for having me here tonight.